It is the 17th of December. I am Chris Cotter. He is
David Robertson, and we are
the Religious Studies Project.
And you are. I don't know who you are, but you know.
On the count of three, listener, say your name. 1, 2, 3. So nice to meet you.
Yeah, good to see you again. This week's episode is the Therwil Affair, Handshakes in Swiss Schools, with Philipp Hetmancyzk and Martin Bürgin. And this is an interview by Thomas White, recorded at the EASR way back last summer. We talked about it quite a bit last week, so you probably know what's coming. If you don't, I'm going to pass over to Thomas and he'll tell you.
Hello there, I'm here in Bern, Switzerland at the EASR. We're on the final day, and I'm joined here by two Swiss early career researchers here, Dr. Philipp Hetmancyzk and Martin Bürgin, both from the University of Zurich. And because it's based in Switzerland, this conference, and we need to really get to grips with issues that are affecting Swiss understandings of religion and politics and religion in the public space, we're going to be talking about the Therwil Affair. This, as far as I remember from reading in the international press a couple of years ago, was a big issue that carried on the winds of international press, as often sensational religious controversies do. But I suspect I'm not the best person to introduce this to our listeners. So, Philipp, Martin, what was the Therwil Affair? Can you please explain this for us?
So what we by now call the Therwil Affair is named, first of all, after the place, Therwil. Therwil is a little town close to the city of Basel, which probably might be better known. In Therwil, there was a secondary school, and two Muslim students of that school, decided not to shake hands due to religious reasons, as they claimed, with the female teacher. And this very local incident kind of became of a nationwide affair, a case where the media was involved, reported extensively, politicians debated about the case, brought it up to the cantonal parliament, and even international media reported about that. So in the end, it became just a huge thing.
Wow. Well, this is an unusual and perhaps even rather hard to understand importance of handshakes. Are handshakes that important in Switzerland?
I think, just to correct your introduction, Martin is the Swiss guy here. I came to Switzerland for doing my PhD that time.
I beg your pardon.
But just to put that straight, no problem at all. But so I think that question Martin definitely has to answer because I never experienced schooling in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, I can answer the question from a very personal level. I grew up in Switzerland. I went to school in Switzerland, and I have to say, I don't remember that shaking hands was a common ritual at school. Maybe at kindergarten, but definitely not at high school. And if we look into that from a historical perspective, we can go one generation back. Then it was very common that students were sitting behind their desks when teachers came in, and they had to stand up and say, "Hallo, Herr Lehrer," and that was it. So there was for sure no handshake at all. But that is maybe on a very personal level, as a scholar in the study of religions. We can discuss this afterwards, but I would say it's very interesting to see the handshake as a symbol within a cultural symbol system. If we remember Stuart Hall, it is participants in a culture who give meaning to people, objects, and practices, and we can interpret it is handshake or the denial of a handshake as a cultural practice.
Right, so the handshake is a symbolic of a far bigger conversation and far bigger issues than just simply, classroom management. But let's try and get to grips with the actual case study before we kind of explore the really big conceptual issues, which will be a fascinating aspect of this topic. Now, as I understand it, the school did try to reconcile this issue on its own terms quite early. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Before the refused handshake was discussed on a national and on an international level, the local school management has already reached a compromise with the students and their parents. And basically, it was agreed that the students should be allowed to acknowledge their teachers with another appropriate, respectful form of greeting, rather than being obliged to shake hands with them. So this compromise temporarily exempted the two students from their obligation to shake hands with their female teachers, but at the same time, it also forbade them to shake hands with their male teachers.
Oh, right. So,
Can I add to that?
Yeah, yes, of course, please.
Because I think what was at stake here, and that's kind of the important point also of the whole affair, the whole stress out of the gender dimension in this thing. Since they refused to shake hands with the female teacher, teachers in the school feared that now they will go against the principle of gender equality if they would allow for that, just like that. So they forced the pupils or convinced them also, if you don't want to shake hands with your female teachers, you don't shake hands with your male teachers either, just to stick to the principle of gender equality, which was made a big issue in this case.
Oh, excellent. So there was an effort to both respect the religious freedom of the Muslim students whilst not kind of transgressing on strong principles of gender neutrality.
Exactly.
But then the issue got a lot larger, didn't it? That the media got hold of it and it ballooned into this national conversation. How was it framed in the media, and how did it kind of create such a controversy?
Yeah, it exploded when the Arena, I would say the most influential political TV program in Switzerland, addressed the subject in two specials under the lurid titles Angst vor dem Islam, Fear of Islam, and Schweiz ohne Gott, Switzerland without God. And then a barrage of reports and comments in the media, as well as the demand of concrete political measures postulated by politicians of influence on national level, put pressure on the cantonal authorities and politicians in Basel country.
I think we have to add to that also that the solution found by the school was just meant as a short time span compromise. The school wanted to have it fixed on legal terms, so they asked for legal expertise to check into the case, because the school wanted sort of defined standards to which they could refer in case something like that would happen again. And so they draw it to a legal level, and this then made the whole thing public. And raised the media attention.
Yes.
So we have then both, or two systems kicking in with both their own interests. The lawyers and the lawmakers checking on this issue on gender equality, freedom of religion, educational law, and parallel to that, the media echo, of course, trying to make that thing kind of a hot topic.
What were the media discussing it within a legal frame? Were they using kind of legal terminology, or were they using kind of more populist ways of engaging with the issue?
Yeah, definitely. It was about, as we said, the equality of women and men. It was about Islam, and Islam as a thing which has to be feared. It was about Christian culture. It was about liberal culture, and so the whole discussion was not really about I couldn't say. It exploded away from this very local issue.
But that was also possible because the media could connect it to other hot topics and hot debates, like building mosques in the public sphere, wearing the burqa, and other debates which are currently
which already existed
before. And the Therwil case was just another piece in that sort of chain of discussions. But that again, this then put it in line with Swiss culture versus Muslim immigrant culture.
Right, so we've got this discussion of a kind of culture war taking place, or certainly that framing of the issue. for our listeners, perhaps who might not be experts in Swiss culture or the history of Swiss national identity, what are the key tropes or key narratives that can help understand the forces behind this conversation, this national debate?
With different narratives here, but I would say one of the most important topics is that of the equality of women and men. And for that, one has to know that in Switzerland, women became their right to vote not until 1971 on a national level, and in one specific canton called Appenzell-Innerrhoden as recently as 1991.
Wow.
Following a decision by the Federal Supreme Court, so not on a basis democratic level. But now it's very interesting to see how the same conservative parties, and sometimes also the very same politicians, now a little bit older, which opposed the right to vote for women a few decades ago, act now as the spokesman for an equality of women and men against, in their point of view, archaic forces which menace Swiss women.
Right. So those who are strongly opposed to, or at least quite skeptical of women's rights, are now using it as a rhetorical means with which to push against Muslims within Switzerland.
It was sort of instrumentalized, I think. That you have, maybe adding to that from a sort of outsider perspective, maybe on Swiss cultural narratives, which are kind of complex, I would also say, which is fascinating. Because you have this narrative of Swiss history and culture as being very liberal, with kind of a lot of referendums, having a very strong sense for democratic procedures. But on the other hand, you have still strong institutions like the army, with sort of with an idolized male warrior culture, sort of, and also the national hero figure, as the guy with the strong bow, shooting the apple, right? The Wilhelm Tell thing.
We know the music, yes.
Yes, and also also a strong sense for that. It is not the army is part of the wider population. Every male guy has to go to the army, takes the weapon home. So whenever there is need to defend the country, they are ready. This thing is still kind of going strong. I have the impression this is not, maybe not as much, of course, like 30, 40 years ago. But if I compare it to like we're in Germany, for example, I think it makes a difference here, where you still have that argument as a.
So I'll be perhaps looking at a machismo which is defending women from insults as opposed to really seeking to enforce gender equality.
I would not go that far.
That's too far.
But the Therwil case definitely kind of was instrumentalized to push the argument forward. Look, there are our Muslim minorities. They have an issue with women's rights, but we don't look at our own shortcomings because we are very liberal. Although you can put many question marks behind that.
Yeah. I mean, the narrative I described before, that was more like the conservative narrative. And of course, you have another narrative, which I would describe as a liberal narrative. So the liberals in their motion, when the whole thing was discussed in the local or in the cantonal parliament, they described the refused handshake as a symbol, I could cite that, I guess, for a fundamentalist and militant ideology. So you hear that in their own words, which contradicts our state and social order, which is built on personal freedom, legal equality, and the equality of men and women. And that's a different thing as the conservatives would propose. So for the liberals, these are the three pillars of society. And Now, from the perspective of a history of concepts, maybe it's interesting to see that if we replace the equality of women and men with a rather old-fashioned term of brotherhood, of course rooted in times of pure male hegemony, we get a very familiar triad of liberté, égalité, et fraternité, and that's the slogan of the French Revolution, which is essential for the self-conception of the Swiss liberals, and that they want to defend.
So on the one hand, we've got the liberal narrative of equality and, kind of Enlightenment values. And then on the other hand, we've got the kind of the conservative...
Defending the Swiss women.
And burying... So we've kind of got this strange confluence of cultural narratives being allied to push against kind of migrant and specifically Muslim identities and interests.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
Sorry to interrupt the episode, but we just wanted to let you know, to remind you about our Patreon link. The Religious Studies Project has always been free since its inception, but we know that there's a great problem in academia with people not being paid for the work that they're expected to do, particularly early career scholars. And we at the RSP want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So you can help if you can spare even £1 a month by going to patreon.com/projectrs and subscribing. We know that these podcasts are very useful for people who are teaching and people in their learning. So if you can help either by subscribing there or by making a one-off donation using the PayPal button on our website, it would be greatly appreciated and will help us keep bringing you this podcast for free and fight against exploitation in academia. But now, back to the episode.
Moving away from perhaps the cultural discussion, but more the legal issue, because it did become a legal discussion as well. How was that framed, and what were the kind of the arguments on either side?
I think one or at least one paraphrase that played an important role here was civic duties versus religious freedoms. Mm-hmm. And as some politicians brought it forward, that civic duties should give primacy over religious freedoms. And this whole trope or this logic has a history in itself, and probably Martin can say a little bit more about that because it goes also back to this culture war history.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the concept of primacy of civic duty, that's also connected with a narrative, with a political narrative. It comes from the Federal Constitution of 1874. It was the first revision of the first constitution of the modern Swiss state, which came from 1838. And both constitutions were products of conflict situations between the Catholic conservative camp and the liberal camp. The Constitution of 1874 and the so-called primacy of civic duty, that was a product of pure culture war politics. This constitution, as well as the first constitution, served as a warrantor of the, at the time, liberal radical majority and was directed against the Catholic conservative minority. So they served as a dispositive of power.
So how does this fit? Is this more kind of ensuring the loyalty of the Catholic community to the Swiss state as opposed to Rome, or the civic duty? I mean, it has some very strong policy implications even today, doesn't it? But
yeah, that was expelled from the constitution, so it's not anymore in the constitution on a national level. So they want to reintroduce that on a canton, or wanted to reintroduce that on a cantonal level after the so-called Therwil incident. Yeah, the constitution, as you said, of 1874, that was a political instrument to weaken the Catholic conservative camp. I mean, it included things like the suppression and ban of the Society of Jesus and prohibition of the establishment and re-establishment of monasteries in Switzerland, the removal of the right to be elected as members of the National Council for Roman Catholic Priests, so not very democratic for Roman Catholic priests, and restrictions against the formation of new Roman Catholic dioceses in Switzerland. That was a pure culture war product.
So, and this narrative of civic duties was being mobilized to push against the religious freedom arguments.
It was brought up again, interestingly, although it has this kind of a history package. But in the end, they had to drop it again. They did not, although it was brought up in the discussion if it should be included in the constitution again, in the cantonal constitution, you have to say. But it was dropped because, of course, it was a lot of legal question marks behind it. If that was still possible, a lot of anyway. To your question about the legal framing, because that's not it. What they still introduced is that cases like Therwil has now to be reported to the Bureau of Immigration Affairs by the teachers. This is now part of the educational law. And I mean, since you asked how this changed, then now the perspective on the Therwil case, because it is clear now, if you now bring it up to the Bureau of Immigration Affairs, then the whole issue of religious diversity in the classroom is now being reduced to an issue of immigration questions.
So we've got an incident that takes place in a classroom now being an issue of immigration. Is there a more to the story there? I mean, were the Muslims the two Muslim school children, were they recent immigrants, or were they citizens, or it seems strange to have.
I think it's second generation kids. But probably not Swiss citizens yet.
Yeah, I think from Syria. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, so we're starting to almost get integration issues starting
totally.
to be, but kind of integration at a national policy level, being focused on what's taking place in the classroom.
I think that was the thing why politicians took the whole issue on a national level to speak about questions of migration, immigration, and maybe not that much about handshakes.
Right. So carrying over into broader anxieties and concerns about immigration to Switzerland, is that how it relates to other controversies? We were suggesting earlier that there are other points of conflict, perhaps, between the national narrative of culture and immigrant communities.
Yeah, no, actually, that we're talking about immigration, I think there's we already mentioned like the burqa, the mosques, the minarets. But I think what we forgot so far is also the debate about immigration as such.
Yes.
Because that's a big topic too. This is about the integration of Switzerland in wider Europe. Because Switzerland kind of experienced a huge influx of foreign workers from all around Europe. And this led also to an intensive debate about immigration, local culture, fears of local customs and Swiss culture sort of dying out. And I think this was just another issue to which the Therwil thing could be associated.
Yeah, so the site of the school being very much a focus of identity politics, and throughout the conference we've been hearing kind of papers that have explored the idea that schools are not simply places where people learn, but almost kind of centers of ideological production where people are children are inculcated with certain values and certain behaviors and certain perspectives. What do you think are the implications for education as such when it gets drawn into these kind of national controversies of culture, citizenship and diversity?
To answer the first part of your question, I think it is still the case. Schools, of course, are places where you learn something about mathematics, where you learn about literature, but also have it from a religious study perspective. School is definitely still a place which is imagined by wider society as a place where its norms and values are being taught and reproduced. So I think this is not gone. But the question is then, what norms and values do you want to teach in school? And I mean, this was also a debate in the Therwil case, because it was said, our school should be a place where they learn to cope with difference, where they should learn about diversity, individual peculiarities, tolerance, respect, and so on. But then what actually happened was that they used this argument to basically outrule then religious diversity in the form of 2 Muslim guys rejecting the handshake. So there was then rather, okay, the school should be a place where norms and values are practiced, but these norms and values are not in accord with what the 2 boys did. So they put then a very strong vision of what school should be and what norms and values should be practiced in school and what does not fit into the school.
But of course, we don't have any definition of what these values and customs should be. I mean, the cantonal government spoke of considering the increasing migration of people with various ethnic and religious backgrounds. It is central that those people respect our laws, our values, and our customs. The cantonal government, you can hear it, does give us a definition what these values and customs should be, but clearly we can see a constructed dichotomy of a we and the others, a construction of identity through alterity.
Fascinating. So yes, so
that
please,
was
Philipp.
because there was a second part of your question which stayed unanswered so far, and that was how this kind of national debates about school and what would be their impact on school being connected to citizenship, and what would probably an alternative way to deal with such national issues in terms of education. And I think what would definitely help in such cases like we have in Therwil is that students and pupils are kind of equipped with the competence for religious questions. And it means also not from a religiously normative perspective, but just having knowledge and competence about religion, so they can basically critically evaluate such debates by themselves and also kind of learn to understand what is at stake here. And that then brings me again back to the study of religion as a discipline, because I think implementing contents from the study of religion in school curricula would help a lot, for example, to equip students to kind of getting an opinion on such things by themselves.
Yeah, so the handshake isn't so much a moment for discipline or, enforcing national homogeneity or cultural integration, but a pedagogic opportunity perhaps where, the kids in the classroom can actually, think about where people come from in different perspectives regarding, the religious values that cause them to physically, interact with people in different ways. I suppose the question I want to conclude with is what is the policy position now? Where are we regarding handshakes in Swiss schools?
That's a very good question, actually. Because the media attention, I think, is kind of gone by now, because the debates are all through. The media is now already to the next events and to the next stuff. So what kind of kept almost unnoticed is that the debates in the parliament went through with the respective change of law, as we described earlier. So the civic duties over religious freedoms has not become part of the constitution, but teachers have to report to the immigration office such incidents, but this then now is kind of out of the media attention, and the case now with this is more or less settled, but with the respective political outcomes, which you can see as it will have an influence on further cases, because this now kind of pre-structured further ways of how to handle with such cases, which this is what the politicians wanted, but which is also kind of given away the chance to probably have a more thorough debate on religious diversity in schools. This chance is now somehow out.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Martin, Philipp. It's an extremely stimulating conversation. Any final comments before we sign off and say farewell to our listeners? I think we're all keen to enjoy a beer now at the end of the conference.
And the next media scandalization in Switzerland will come for sure.
Wonderful.
Definitely.
Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much for that. And it was a real sacrifice on Tom's part because the conference had finished. We had already repaired to a public house. I was there with Sammy and Suzanne Owen and a few others, and then Tom had to say, I need to go and do a podcast now, and he left. So thanks doubly for that, Tom.
Yeah, what a trooper.
I should also say 17th of December, it's my dad's birthday today. Happy birthday, Dad.
Happy birthday,
I
Dr.
don't,
Cotter.
Yeah, I don't know that you listen to the podcast, but I will make you listen to this one. That's always a thing that comes up pretty much 1 week before Christmas every year. He gets 2 sets of presents, and you get presents, listeners, in the run-up to Christmas each year. You get our festive midwinter, non-denominational, non-specific, totally inoffensive special.
That's right, and I don't know if I would say totally inoffensive, as it is hosted by the indefatigable Jonathan Tuckett. And this year we're playing a version of The Chase. Not exactly the same as BBC's The Chase. In fact, we changed enough of it so that we couldn't possibly be held legally accountable, but inspired by BBC's The Chase.
Exactly. So that was quite fun, and you'll get to meet our mystery chaser, and then we'll see who manages to walk away with the crown, I suppose.
Yeah, if you've watched or listened to our previous Christmas specials, all of which are available on the website, and we'll probably share them in the run up to Christmas, you might have a fair guess as to who our mystery chaser / champion of champions might be.
Exactly. And so that'll be going out on Christmas Eve, after which point we'll have a break for a couple of weeks, just to let everything settle. But I think I said we'd be back around the 14th of January.
That's right. But if you're in need of your RSP fix in the meantime, don't forget that if you're supporting us through Patreon, or if you are at the University of Alabama or a member of the BASR, you can check out our monthly discourse episodes, which is our kind of news and current affairs program, hosted by either Chris or myself and a cavalcade of guests. Mm-hmm. And you can also check out our Are You My Data series. We've got 2 of those up so far with Russell McCutcheon and Carol Cusack. And that's a bit more of a kind of, it's listener questions for a start, and it's a little bit more less about research, more about the people and their jobs.
It's the Religious Studies Project After Dark.
Yeah, religious RSP late. So if you want to hear some more sort of controversial stuff from them, you should check out those episodes, and both of them are absolutely hilarious and actually some really good insights in terms of academic careers, the academic field, the way that the university sector works today. So I recommend you checking those out.
Fantastic. And thank you, listeners, for bearing with us throughout the year. And we look forward to being heard by you in 2019.
And before we go, we should also say thank you to all of the editors who contribute week in, week out and make this possible, and all of the interviewers, and indeed all the interviewees who've taken part this year. I think it's been a fantastic year myself, so thanks all of you.
And thanks for listening.
The Religious Studies Project is sponsored by the British Association for the Study of Religions, the North American Association for the Study of Religion, and the International Association for the History of Religions.
Brought to you by founders and editors-in-chief Chris Cotter and David Robertson, and managing editor Thomas J. Coleman III. Our features are edited by Jonathan Tuckett, and our Opportunities Digest by Jana Shirley. Podcast transcription by Helen Bradstock, with audio assistance from Gregory Schneider and Samuel Ward. Social media managed by Ray Radford, and sales and marketing by Sammy Bishop.
Don't forget, you can support the project using our amazon.com.co.uk and .ca links, or by donating at patreon.com/projectrs. And you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube, iTunes, and other portals.